My name is Madison Clark. I'm 32, and I've spent the last 10 years climbing, crawling, and clawing my way through corporate finance with precision most people would mistake for luck. I wasn't lucky. I was deliberate. Every spreadsheet, every forecast, every late-night analysis was a calculated move in a game I refused to lose. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment I walked into my CEO's son's office that Tuesday morning. The corridor smelled faintly of polished wood and recycled ambition, and the muffled hum of the office felt like static electricity building before a storm. His office door, slightly ajar, revealed him lounging behind a massive mahogany desk, leather chair tilted back like he owned not just the room but the entire company. I stepped inside with purpose. I didn't flinch when he glanced up. He was young, maybe 28, impeccably groomed, and arrogant in the way only privilege can afford. I was aware of exactly how dangerous this was. The entire company knew he was the heir apparent, untouchable by rules, evaluations, or merit. But I wasn't there to play his games. I was there to get what I needed. He looked at me like I had interrupted a private performance. "Madison," he said, a hint of amusement curling at the edges of his voice. "You're early." I ignored the comment, crossing the room slowly, heels clicking against the polished floor. "We need to discuss the Q1 portfolio," I said evenly, placing the files I had prepared on his desk. He smirked, leaning forward, resting his chin on his hand. "Do you really think you can handle this without my guidance?" His tone was light, playful even, but I felt the tension coil tight in my chest. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened the first file, slid it toward him, and let the numbers speak. They didn't need me to explain them twice. Revenue projections, client risk assessments, operational inefficiencies, every dollar mapped with precision and justification. He leaned in, scanning the pages, and for a moment, I saw recognition in his eyes. A flicker. But it was fleeting. He tossed the file back with a casual flick. "Impressive," he said, almost bored. "But you'll need to come with me to my father's meeting. He's expecting to see the portfolio overview in person. No mistakes." I nodded. I knew this was the trap. Walking into that room was like stepping into a live wire, knowing a single misstep could burn my career. But I did it anyway. I followed him through the glass doors of the executive suite. The CEO's office was larger than my apartment, walls lined with awards and plaques, digital stock tickers flashing numbers like some ritualistic heartbeat. He gestured at the empty seat across from his father and smiled at me, a mix of mischief and challenge. I sat. My pulse was steady despite the adrenaline. I had been underestimated my entire life for looking too calm or too meticulous, and now I would use that against them. The CEO's son introduced me as if I were an assistant, glancing at his father with a grin. "She'll walk you through the numbers," he said casually. The CEO nodded, oblivious to the fact that I could dismantle his assumptions with a single slide. I began presenting. Revenue streams, client retention, operational margins, forecast risks, each metric dissected, explained, and linked to actionable steps. His father leaned forward, genuinely intrigued, asking questions I anticipated and answered before he could fully form them. The son, meanwhile, reclined, a spectator to my precision, perhaps expecting me to falter, to stumble, to reveal that I was just another analyst trying to play at a game far above my level. But I didn't falter. I didn't flinch. Every number, every insight, every recommendation landed exactly as intended. By the time I finished, the CEO was nodding, impressed, and the son was quiet, jaw tight, eyes narrowing in a way that made me aware he recognized what I'd just done. I had asserted dominance without raising my voice, without theatrics, without drama. The kind of control that scares people who think power is inherited rather than earned. As we left the room, the son's hand brushed mine as he opened the door. It was casual, deliberate, a test of boundaries. I didn't recoil, but I felt the surge of anger and awareness at once. I knew then that he would expect leverage, influence, perhaps manipulation. He was learning, at that moment, that I was not a person to manipulate. I left the suite, walked down the corridor, and felt an unfamiliar clarity settle over me. I was no longer just an employee following orders. I was an operator, a strategist, a force that could move through the hierarchy without being pinned. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that the next time he tried to corner me, the stakes would be higher, not for me, but for the company, because every misstep he made would now cost them real money. Every minute of hesitation, every second of arrogance, would be measured in losses I could exploit. And I intended to. The days after that meeting carried a strange tension, the kind that sits quietly beneath polite emails and scheduled calls, the kind you feel before something irreversible happens. I noticed it in the way people paused before speaking to me, in the way my calendar suddenly filled with quick syncs that were never quick, and most clearly in the way he started appearing everywhere. The CEO's son began finding reasons to be near my work, leaning against doorframes, stopping by my desk with questions he already knew the answers to, smiling as if we shared some private understanding. We didn't. What we shared was a power imbalance he assumed worked in his favor. I kept my tone neutral, my responses precise, my boundaries intact. I had learned long ago that professionalism isn't about being pleasant, it's about being unmovable. Still, I could feel his attention sharpening, shifting from casual interest to something more territorial, more entitled. He didn't like that I didn't need him, and people like him mistake that independence for a challenge. The first time I said no to him, it was almost invisible. He asked if he could drop by my office later to review numbers together. I told him my door would be closed and my focus would be elsewhere. He laughed like it was a joke, like I didn't understand the rules. When the time came, I closed my door anyway. I needed the quiet, not just for work, but to think. For weeks, I had been running scenarios in my head, tracing dependencies, mapping vulnerabilities, realizing just how much of the company's operational intelligence flowed through me. Not because I demanded it, but because I had become the person who fixed what others broke. That realization was both empowering and dangerous. A knock came at my door. Then another. I didn't answer. A minute later, the handle moved. I stood up immediately and opened the door myself. He stood there, eyebrows raised, amused. "You can't just lock me out," he said lightly. I looked him in the eyes and replied, "I can," and I did. The air shifted. His smile thinned. For the first time, I saw irritation flash across his face. He stepped back, hands up, mock surrender. "Relax, Madison," he said. Didn't mean to offend. But offense wasn't the point. Control was. I closed the door again and returned to my desk, heart steady, mind clearer than it had been in months. 2 days later, I had to go to his office to deliver updated projections before a board pre-read. I didn't want to, but avoiding him wasn't a strategy, it was a delay. His door was open when I arrived. He waved me in, posture casual, confidence loud. I placed the folder on his desk and began explaining the adjustments, my voice even, my eyes on the numbers. Halfway through, he stood up and walked around the desk, coming too close, invading the space I had carefully maintained. I took a step back instinctively. He reached out then, fingers closing around my wrist, not aggressively, not violently, but deliberately. Possessively. The room went quiet in a way that felt unreal. In that single second, everything aligned. The long hours. The subtle dismissals. The entitlement. The risk I had been calculating without fully naming. I pulled my hand free immediately. "Don't touch me," I said, my voice low and steady, colder than I'd ever heard it. His expression changed, surprise flickering into something defensive. "You're overreacting," he said. That sentence did more damage than the contact itself. Overreacting. As if my autonomy was negotiable. As if my boundaries were optional. I walked out without another word. I didn't slam the door. I didn't raise my voice. I returned to my office, shut the door, and sat down. My hands were steady, but my decision had already been made. In that moment, I understood something with absolute clarity: staying would cost me more than leaving ever could. Not just professionally, but personally. I opened my laptop and began transferring files, not out of panic, but preparation. Over the next few hours, I documented processes, dependencies, vendor contacts, systems only I fully understood. I didn't owe them this, but I owed myself a clean exit. That evening, I went home and slept deeply for the first time in weeks. When I woke up, the anger wasn't loud. It was focused. I submitted my resignation 3 days later. No accusations. No drama. Just facts and dates. The reaction was immediate. Meetings requested. Calls missed. Messages sent. I ignored them all. I had already shifted my energy forward. What they didn't realize yet was that I wasn't just leaving a role, I was taking knowledge, strategy, and momentum with me, all within legal and ethical boundaries, all earned, all mine. Within weeks, I began laying the foundation for my own firm, quietly, carefully, building something lean, precise, and ruthless in its efficiency. I knew their weaknesses because I had spent years compensating for them. When my company launched, clients followed. Not out of loyalty, but trust. And that's when the losses started. Small at first, then measurable, then impossible to ignore. Contracts stalled. Deals collapsed. Every minute of indecision cost them money, and they felt it. The CEO started calling. Once. Twice. Then repeatedly. I watched the phone light up and let it ring. I had nothing left to explain. I had already said everything that mattered with my silence. The first morning after my resignation officially went through, I stayed home. My inbox flooded immediately, the kind of messages you know are written with a mix of panic and ego, but I didn't open them. I let the CEO call 3 times before I glanced at the missed calls. Each ring was another reminder that the small chain of decisions I'd set in motion was already cascading. His son texted afterward, short, clipped, trying to reclaim a sense of control, but the truth was, he had none anymore. I smiled as I poured my coffee, the sunlight streaming across my kitchen counter, a stark contrast to the sterile fluorescent of the office where power had always been performative, never real. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had been underestimated, undervalued, and yet, in leaving, I had acquired a leverage no one could buy: time, clarity, and control. That first week of my new company was exhilarating. Every call, every email, every onboarding meeting reinforced what I already knew. I was building from scratch, but on my terms. I set clear boundaries, communicated expectations, and built systems that made me untouchable in ways I had never experienced in corporate life. Meanwhile, the losses at my former company began to show. Not abstract losses, not hypothetical projections, they were real, calculated in dollars and cents. Every minute their internal operations faltered without me, every mismanaged client call, every delayed approval began to erode revenue. I watched the numbers climb, a slow but precise bleed, and I didn't celebrate with glee. I noted them with professional satisfaction. This wasn't revenge for the sake of ego. It was simply the natural consequence of having underestimated me, the kind of lesson that can't be sugar-coated by slogans, branded merchandise, or casual dismissals. By the end of week 2, the CEO's office was buzzing with tension. I started receiving direct messages through professional networking, anonymous at first, then not so anonymous, from employees still trapped in the hierarchy I had just escaped. They asked questions, sought guidance, and occasionally admitted things they couldn't voice internally. "How did you walk away?" one message read. Another said, "I've been telling them for months it's unsustainable, but no one listens." "You just left." How? I realized in that moment that the ripple effect of one confident exit could be profound. People were learning, seeing that agency was not only possible but necessary. And the irony was delicious. I didn't have to do anything more than continue my work. The pressure they had built internally was collapsing under its own weight. Then came the calls from the CEO himself. Each ring a reminder that he thought his position, his authority, could pressure me back into compliance, submission, or, at the very least, back into his sphere. I let them ring. Twice I picked up, just long enough to ask one question: did you calculate the financial impact of last week's missed approvals? Silence. Then a cough, an attempt at explanation that faltered. I had exact numbers, perfectly mapped projections, and I had shared none of them. They didn't need me to sabotage anything, they simply weren't prepared for a world in which I wasn't the silent operator fixing mistakes before they became crises. By week 3, their internal losses were visible in their metrics dashboard, revenue tracking, and, more importantly, morale. Teams were overworked, decisions delayed, emails unanswered. My departure had created a vacuum, and no one in the hierarchy had the knowledge or discipline to fill it. It was his son who finally reached out again. I had anticipated this. He sent a text, short and tentative: "Madison, we need to talk. Please." I didn't respond. Control was mine to wield, and silence had more power than words could ever carry. Within hours, I heard through mutual contacts that the CEO had personally flown in, asking for internal briefings, demanding explanations, and trying to contain the damage. I smiled at the thought. Months of being undervalued, ignored, and underestimated had built a strategy one hadn't even tried to execute aggressively. It was just the natural consequence of competence meeting incompetence in a vacuum. By the 4th week, the financial damage became undeniable. Every lost minute, every delayed transaction, every small misstep now aggregated into a visible shortfall. Meetings were frantic. Staff turnover spiked. The CEO called again. His son called again. And still, I did nothing except focus on the launch of my own firm, ensuring every client received the precision, clarity, and accountability that my former company had refused to deliver to its own stakeholders. It wasn't revenge. It was proof. Proof that undervaluing expertise, underestimating discipline, and dismissing boundaries would eventually cost more than a paycheck, more than a role, more than even a $7 voucher could ever represent. And in that chaos, I began to recognize a deeper satisfaction. The lesson wasn't in the money lost, or the calls ignored, or the panicked executives scrambling. It was in clarity. In understanding that my choice, my calm, deliberate withdrawal, had created a ripple so strong it couldn't be ignored. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't leaked anything. I had merely walked, and in walking, I had reminded everyone of a principle too often forgotten in corporate corridors: control, competence, and clarity cannot be replaced by titles, connections, or entitlement. They can only be earned, and when they leave, the vacuum is felt immediately. By the time week 5 rolled around, the rhythm of my new company was a stark contrast to the chaos I had left behind. My mornings started with coffee made exactly how I liked it, not in a styrofoam cup grabbed between meetings. My inbox was organized, not a battlefield of neglected approvals and desperate urgent requests. Every project had a clear owner, every deadline was realistic, and every system had a contingency plan, because I had spent years building them for others, and now I could build for myself. The difference was profound. I had agency, not just responsibility, and the work felt alive instead of suffocating. But as much as I relished the clarity and control, I also watched the fallout from Vanguard with a detached satisfaction. The CEO's son was now practically begging for attention in professional circles, but I remained unreachable, untouchable, because I knew the real leverage wasn't in responding, it was in letting the impact unfold naturally. Clients began arriving quietly but consistently. Not the ones who expected exploitation, overwork, and empty promises, but those who needed someone who could anticipate problems before they became crises. I structured my team lean, capable, and fiercely autonomous, insisting that boundaries were non-negotiable. Work intelligently, not incessantly, I told them on day 1. Their reactions ranged from relief to disbelief, but within weeks, the results spoke louder than any reassurance I could offer. Revenue began to flow in, contracts signed without drama, and processes that once took entire teams months to complete were now handled with precision by a handful of disciplined analysts. My reputation grew quietly, as it always had, on the strength of results rather than noise. Meanwhile, at Vanguard, the consequences of my departure had intensified. Missed deadlines compounded into contractual penalties. Internal miscommunications escalated into failed client meetings. Every minute that previously passed unnoticed now registered in dollars lost. The CEO's calls increased exponentially, sometimes directly to me, sometimes to former colleagues attempting to locate the missing knowledge that only I had held. I didn't answer. Not because I was cruel, but because I understood the most powerful position in a conflict is often silence. Let them feel the gap. Let them reconcile their assumptions with reality. Every mismanaged report, every frustrated client, every board-level panic call was a silent confirmation of everything I had been saying for months. No $7 voucher, no motivational slogan, no empty gesture could substitute for real competence, real leadership, or real accountability. Then came the escalation with the CEO's son. He began showing up at industry networking events, trying to appear authoritative, as if proximity to his father equaled insight or skill. I watched him from a distance, sometimes smiling quietly at his overconfidence. When he approached my firm under the guise of collaboration, I let him speak for 10 minutes before interrupting. "I don't operate in hypotheticals," I said calmly. "I don't negotiate based on presence or inheritance. If you want results, you need capability, not influence. And capability can't be borrowed, only earned." He left flustered, as all those who had once underestimated me now did. I didn't gloat. I documented. I prepared. Every interaction, every misstep, became part of the careful structure I was building, proof that competence could exist without the pretense of power, and that entitlement without discipline always falters. By mid-month, the financial impact at Vanguard had reached a scale impossible to ignore. Every loss, every minute of wasted effort, every frustrated client translated into measurable consequences. Their internal metrics began flashing red, their executives scrambling for explanations, their teams collapsing under pressure. HR started whispering about resignations. Board members demanded clarity. And still, I didn't answer calls. I had spent years being indispensable to others' success, now I was indispensable to my own vision. The stark lesson had been learned: when people are treated as expendable, the consequences will eventually hit those who assumed control. I wasn't responsible for their panic, but their pain was the inevitable result of decisions they had made for years, believing loyalty, overwork, and silent compliance were assets they could exploit indefinitely. Late one evening, as I finalized my internal systems for the next quarter, my phone buzzed with an anonymous message. It was from someone still inside Vanguard. "You don't know the half of it. The CEO is panicked. Every department is missing you. We've lost thousands in a week. He keeps calling your former team, threatening them if they don't deliver." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The lesson was already written in the numbers, in the missed deadlines, in the stress cascading from the top down. And that was the most satisfying part of all. No drama. No manipulation. No theatrics. Just the quiet, undeniable power of competence, preparation, and self-respect. I leaned back in my chair, hands clasped behind my head, and let myself breathe for the first time in months. The office was quiet, my team efficient, my clients happy, and my calendar mine to control. The knowledge that my former company was now bleeding under its own mismanagement, that the CEO's son had discovered firsthand that privilege is no substitute for skill, filled me with a quiet clarity. This was not revenge. This was justice, calm, precise, and unavoidable. I didn't have to yell, threaten, or manipulate. I simply existed outside their expectations, executing competence with deliberate intention. And in that existence, I had created more value than they ever could, for myself and for the people who had been quietly suffering under their leadership. By the 6th week, the situation at Vanguard had become almost surreal. Every report I had meticulously built for them, every process I had trained my former team to run flawlessly, had become a ticking time bomb once I stepped away. The CFO's frantic emails, now forwarded to multiple execs, were a clear indicator. Without someone who understood the nuance, the numbers were collapsing. I watched the losses accumulate like a live scoreboard, every contract mismanaged, every late deliverable inflating the cost. And still, I did nothing. Not out of malice, but because I understood the principle of leverage. In corporate wars, patience often outweighed impulsive action, and the more they tried to scramble, the more their mistakes multiplied. Then there was the CEO's son. I began to notice him at industry gatherings, trying desperately to assert authority he hadn't earned. Each time, I let him speak first, gauging his confidence, the weight he carried in others' perception. And every time, I interrupted, calmly but sharply, dismantling his arguments with precision, exposing gaps in logic, gaps in experience, and, most importantly, gaps in respect from the professionals who actually mattered. I didn't need to humiliate him, he was doing that to himself, but the impact was unavoidable. The pattern was clear: privilege without preparation is powerless, and competence without compromise is undeniable. Internally, my company was thriving. My team, small but disciplined, operated with clarity and focus. Every decision was deliberate, every accountability line transparent. I refused shortcuts, refused to compromise ethics for speed, and refused to let anyone assume my work ethic could be exploited without consequence. The contrast with Vanguard was stark. Where they panicked at every minor discrepancy, we built systems that anticipated discrepancies and prevented them. Where they treated people as interchangeable resources, I cultivated loyalty through respect. And where they had celebrated a record quarter with cupcakes and a $7 voucher, we celebrated with clear metrics, promotions, and meaningful rewards tied directly to performance and sustainability. By the 8th week, the financial reports leaking from my former company reached me indirectly through professional networks. One senior analyst, quietly desperate, texted me a screenshot: "We just lost another major client. Numbers are tanking. Can't fix this without you." I didn't reply. Instead, I sat back and watched the consequences compound. Each minute of inefficiency at Vanguard translated to thousands of dollars lost. And yet, every panic call they made, every attempt to reach me, only reinforced the lesson I had learned years ago: the people who exploit dedication without respect are the architects of their own downfall. The tipping point came when the CEO personally called my old colleagues. Threats were whispered, promises made, ultimatums issued. I heard about it through the same analyst. They were burning out faster than ever, struggling under unattainable deadlines, no clarity from leadership, and no way to reach me. And all I could do was quietly smile at the symmetry of it. The chaos was the natural outcome of years of mismanagement, compounded by their assumption that my work, my dedication, and my expertise could be replaced instantly. They hadn't factored in the human element, the one element that can never be duplicated or outsourced without consequence. Then, in week 9, the CEO's son made his boldest move yet. He attempted to contact me directly, offering partnership, promising incentives, implying that if I returned, things could be fixed. I read his message and set my phone down without replying. I knew exactly why he was calling: panic, desperation, the realization that inheritance doesn't equal skill, and that the absence of true leadership can destroy even a profitable company overnight. I didn't respond because responding would mean engaging in the illusion that they had any leverage over me. They had none. The leverage had always been mine: the knowledge, the competence, and the discipline they had taken for granted for years. At the same time, my company grew stronger. Every contract we executed, every client satisfied, was a silent testament to what sustainable, deliberate, respectful leadership could achieve. We were not moving faster than everyone else, we were moving smarter, with clarity and precision. And the comparison with Vanguard, which had once been my cage, was now a case study in how ignoring human limits and exploiting trust inevitably leads to collapse. The irony was delicious, but I didn't dwell on it. I had more important things to focus on: growing, protecting my team, and continuing to execute with precision. One afternoon, while reviewing projections for the next quarter, I glanced at the news feed. There it was: Vanguard had officially reported a multi-million-dollar loss, one that analysts directly tied to mismanagement and the sudden departure of key personnel. I sat back, letting the moment settle. This wasn't about revenge, not really. This was about clarity. About the undeniable truth that competence, respect, and boundaries cannot be ignored without consequence. And as I leaned back, hands clasped behind my head, I felt the same calm, deliberate power I had felt the day I scanned that $7 voucher next to their record quarter. The dominoes had fallen exactly as they should, and I hadn't lifted a finger beyond executing my own vision with discipline and precision. By the 10th week, the calls started arriving in earnest. Not just from the CEO's son this time, but from the CEO himself, the CFO, and even HR reaching out under the guise of urgent discussion. They didn't understand that urgency is not a lever when the decision to leave, and the systems you built, already existed outside their control. Each voicemail was carefully logged, unread, and left to pile up in a folder titled, almost sarcastically, Evidence of Panic. I knew exactly what they wanted, a miracle, a return, a compromise that would let them pretend leadership mattered more than they had proven. But the truth was simple, I had no intention of stepping back into the cage I had escaped. The first direct email came from the CFO, subject line, immediate action required, Q3 and Q4 forecast disruption. He detailed, in panicked bullet points, missing revenue, misaligned contracts, and escalating client dissatisfaction. I read it over a cup of coffee at my desk, the sunlight through my window catching the edge of the new office I had deliberately designed for clarity and focus. The contrast couldn't have been starker. Here I was, in a place that respected boundaries, efficiency, and human limits, while they scrambled like amateurs trying to patch a dam with tissue paper. I forwarded the email to my COO with a simple note, "This is the result of ignoring capacity, respecting no one, and assuming talent is interchangeable." That one line became a quiet internal rallying cry in our company. The CEO's son was next. He called me directly, his voice tight with a mixture of panic and anger. "Madison, this isn't just numbers, it's the company. You have to come back, or at least help us stabilize this." I let him talk, calmly counting the seconds between his breaths, noticing the way his words betrayed inexperience and entitlement. When he paused, I responded softly, deliberately, almost conversationally, "You had me when I was inside your systems. I left for a reason. You didn't respect limits, you didn't value the work, and now you're watching the inevitable consequences. My return doesn't fix what was broken, it just delays the lesson you're learning in real time." His voice rose in disbelief. "You don't understand, this is millions of dollars at stake." I allowed myself a slow, measured smile. "Exactly. Millions of dollars. That's what ignoring human limits costs. That's what undervaluing expertise costs. And it's precisely why I'm here building something sustainable. Your panic is not my responsibility. Your losses are the natural outcome of choices you made knowingly and repeatedly." By the 12th week, the pressure became more aggressive. The CEO sent a formal letter through their legal team outlining non-disclosure agreements, urgent collaboration requests, and implied professional consequences if I didn't engage. I read it carefully, noting each threat and overreach. And then I replied. Not with anger, not with drama, but with clarity, I am operating fully within my rights. You have no leverage over me beyond what you've already lost. Every call, every contract mismanaged, every operational failure is the result of your decisions, not mine. You are free to learn this lesson, or not. Either way, I will continue to build responsibly, profitably, and sustainably. The ripple effect was extraordinary. My company gained credibility overnight. Investors, already impressed with our efficiency and client retention, now had a live case study of what happens when leadership ignores its most capable employees. Word spread quietly, strategically, Vanguard's system was failing without the very person they had undervalued. Clients who were frustrated with delays began approaching us, intrigued by the contrast in operations. By the end of the month, we had signed 2 new contracts directly resulting from Vanguard's mismanagement. Each deal was a small, quiet confirmation of principle, respect for talent and systems wins in the long run. And yet, even with growing success, I remained deliberate. I didn't gloat publicly. I didn't post passive-aggressive updates. Every move was measured, calculated to maximize stability for my team, not chaos for my former company. My leverage was in knowledge, capability, and discipline, the same assets they had once taken for granted. Every voicemail ignored, every email unanswered, reinforced the lesson: panic does not compel respect. Competence does. Structure does. Consistency does. Then came the moment of ultimate clarity. I was copied on an internal email chain between Vanguard executives, sent out in frustration. The CEO admitted that they had underestimated the complexity of their operations and the human cost of their decisions. His son, attempting to rationalize, suggested hiring someone new to fill Madison's role immediately. The CEO replied bluntly, "You can't replace her. You didn't appreciate her while she was here. Now we are paying the price." I sat back, letting the words sink in. They had finally articulated the truth I had been demonstrating for weeks: you cannot replace respect, understanding, and capability with entitlement or inherited position. The math doesn't lie. By the end of part 6, the CEO's office had lost control, the sun was floundering, and my company continued growing stronger with each passing day. I had turned their desperation into leverage, their mistakes into lessons, and their underestimation into opportunity. I realized, with a quiet satisfaction, that the ultimate form of power in business isn't aggression, it's deliberate, patient execution. And for the first time in weeks, I felt the calm certainty that comes from being in complete control, watching the dominoes fall exactly where they should. By the time the 15th week rolled around, everything had settled into a rhythm that felt almost surreal. Vanguard was still reeling from the cascading effects of their mismanagement, and my company, Nova Strategies, had become a quiet but undeniable force in the sector. Each contract we signed, each client we onboarded, was a testament to systems built for people, not just spreadsheets. I walked into the office each morning knowing exactly what needed to be done, and more importantly, that my team's energy and well-being were protected. I had turned the chaos that had consumed my life at Vanguard into a blueprint for sustainable success. The CEO's calls had stopped entirely. His son still tried, occasionally, a desperate voicemail or an awkward email, but I no longer read them immediately. Instead, I saved them, a subtle archive of hubris and entitlement that reminded me how precise patience can be its own kind of power. My leverage wasn't just the contracts or the client wins, it was the truth, documented and undeniable. The market saw it. Our competitors saw it. And most importantly, my team felt it. There is a kind of quiet confidence in watching people thrive because you protected them from the exact mistakes that once consumed you. One morning, I received an unexpected email from one of Vanguard's senior executives. It was carefully worded, cautious, and full of corporate euphemisms. "Madison, your approach to operations and leadership has given us pause. We underestimated the human element of execution. While we cannot undo past mistakes, we hope to learn from your methods. Any advice or consultation you may provide would be received with sincere appreciation." I smiled. Not because I wanted to advise them, not because I owed them anything, but because the acknowledgement, however late, validated the principle I had been proving all along: competence and respect for human capital always win in the end. I forwarded the email internally to my COO with one line: principle over panic. Lesson learned. Meanwhile, Nova Strategies continued growing, deliberately, methodically. Each hire was chosen for skill and cultural fit. Each process was designed to respect the people executing it. The chaos I had endured was now an artifact, a case study for my team: what happens when talent is undervalued, when systems ignore human limits, and when leadership confuses busy work for strategic execution. We worked hard, yes, but we worked with purpose, clarity, and fairness. It was revolutionary only because the corporate world often treats those concepts as optional. Then came the final confirmation of the power I had quietly amassed. I received a report detailing Vanguard's quarterly losses, not just in dollars but in reputation. The CEO had personally intervened, attempting damage control, but the gaps in their operations were now public knowledge. Investors had begun asking questions. Key clients were reevaluating their contracts. The $285 million quarter, which had once seemed untouchable, was now a cautionary tale. And I, deliberately, had not touched a single piece of that revenue chain. I had only walked away, leaving their systems exposed to the natural consequences of neglect. One afternoon, as I reviewed a new client forecast, I realized something else. The greatest power isn't vengeance or exposure, it's the calm certainty that comes from building something right while others scramble to repair what they broke. My mornings no longer began with anxiety or dread. My nights weren't haunted by panic or exhaustion. I had reconstructed my professional life around principles that actually mattered: respect, sustainable work, and deliberate execution. Every dollar, every decision, every strategy reflected that ethos. I thought about Madison, the person I had been at Vanguard, and the $7 voucher that had sparked clarity. That voucher didn't break me. It revealed the truth: I was worth far more than any symbolic gesture or empty praise. That realization had guided me to this point, to Nova Strategies, to a place where my expertise and effort were valued, leveraged, and respected. It was not revenge. It was a natural consequence of competence and choice. I had created a system where excellence and humanity coexist. By the time I looked out my office window at sunset, the city lights beginning to flicker, I felt a deep, rare calm. The chaos I left behind was still visible in the world, but it no longer belonged to me. I had claimed my time, my energy, my professional dignity. I had turned overworked nights and undervalued labor into clarity, into leverage, into real power. And if Vanguard ever truly learned anything from the experience, it would be that you cannot replace human talent with shortcuts, slogans, or superficial recognition. I had stepped into the unknown, walked through the storm, and emerged unscathed, not because I sought confrontation, but because I refused to compromise on principle. And as the light dimmed across the skyline, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. This was the ultimate lesson: when you know your worth, when you act with precision, and when you respect both yourself and those who depend on you, the world adjusts around you. The chaos falls away. The victories come quietly, deliberately, inevitably. And you are finally free.